I just wanted to start off by thanking everybody for participating in the Ontario Cycling Association's Women's Cycling Week. And today is Thursday, July 9th, and today is our panel about inclusivity and diversity within cycling. There was a lot of interest on this panel, and as a note to anybody who is listening, this conversation is being recorded, and we're hoping to be able to post this discussion on our YouTube channel afterwards, so others will be able to hear the things that we've discussed and maybe suggestions that we've had and some conclusions that perhaps have come out of this conversation. I'm joined today by 6 panelists. I'll go in alphabetical order based on their last name. All right, we have Pauline Beaupre, Julia Farrell, Kathleen Mcewen, Chrissy Molnar, Rosa Phillip, and Emilee Schevers. Perfect. So I'll kick things off. I'm only going to be just helping the flow move nicely here. We're just going to go through person by person and give ourselves a little bit of an introduction, starting off with Pauline.
Hi, everyone. So my name's Pauline. I'm located in downtown Toronto. I guess I got into cycling around 6 years ago. I had a friend who had a road bike, and I mean, I've always commuted from when I went to school in Guelph, and then when I moved to Toronto to also attend school. It was always a mode of transportation, but then I bought a road bike and started getting into the sport aspect. It didn't take very long until I realized that this is something that I really liked, and then I bought a cyclocross bike. And that's predominantly the type of racing that I do. So I kind of, you know, within a year, did my first P2A, and then that following season started doing the O Cup series. And then throughout the years, I've kind of graduated into going down to the States to do some of the racing. So that's kind of the racing side of things. I also see cycling very much as a means of transportation. Professionally, I'm an urban planner and I work for the City of Toronto. So not necessarily in transportation planning, but always kind of seeing how we plan cities, how do we get more people on bikes? Because if you look at other countries, Netherlands, for example, they have such a strong participation in the sport, both men and women. And I think it kind of comes from cycling being so much in their culture, and people use it as a transportation, and then they get into the sport. I guess another notable thing in terms of kind of the panel is a couple years ago, a couple girls and I in the city started the Bow Plus group ride. And that kind of came pretty organically, where we were doing other group rides, but noticed there seems to be women group rides are slow. And that's kind of how a lot of clubs categorize it. So we wanted to do something that was a bit more, why can't group rides for female and female identifying being faster group rides? So we started that, and this would have been our 5th season going into it, but we are kind of on hold right now, but that's kind of my background.
Perfect. And something notable also is Pauline is on our board of directors for the Ontario Cycling Association. Awesome. Now moving to another connection that we do have through the OCA. Julia took a team of women to the Tour de Macadance last year, so she's quite the good cycling coach, but I'll hand it over to Julia to give her own introduction.
Oh, thanks, Chantal. You can hear me pretty well? Okay. Well, Chantal, you know, she actually came with me to that race, so I did have a very good support when we went. I guess you can start chronologically. I started racing, 22, road racing. I don't really know why, but I'm still riding my bike, so I can't seem to give it up, which is, I guess it's an okay thing to be addicted to. And as I went through the racing, I improved, and I was able to work through the levels. So for example, back then, you know, when you made the Ontario team, you would get sent to nationals. And so I needed that. So I needed the support to get to nationals. And then I continued and I pushed on, and somehow I made the national team, the elite national team. And again, same thing at the time. Canada would send you, and you would actually do projects in Europe. So I raced all over France. I actually did the first women's World Cup called Flèche Wallonne and it is still on. So the Pro Tour will still do Flèche It's a classic. And yeah, that hill is harder than it looks when you watch television. So I did a ton of racing, and now I'm at a point where I am getting older, and so I still want to be involved with competition. And so I have been in the last few years doing some projects with the OCA and trying to fill in gaps. So there's already some really good things going on, and so trying to identify where we can fill things in. And there's some places where we can provide more opportunities. And a lot of that is for female road cyclists. And so that's my focus right now, and doing well. So it's challenging each person that comes along to do their best. And this year, together with the help with Sue Palmer, who is also a pretty big bike racer in the past, to start off a team and a training group that demands excellence of each rider. And so basically the coined phrase is a team by women, for women, but it is not just that. And it is showing up and doing your very best on every training ride, and providing a training ride that is, again, filling gaps. So we all know that you can show up to a group ride, and there might be, maybe not now so much, but in the past there might be 20 or 30 people, and then it was just go. And so you just go, and maybe over here is the sprint, and over there is the slow part, and over there is the coffee part. And these are great rides. But what is missing is actually a focused, coached ride. So for example, on Sunday, we were doing lead outs, and it's 3-person lead outs. And how do you do a lead out? Then we're doing echelon. And if you're not smooth, you're going to hear about it from me, right? So at least when people come to the rides, I'm giving back fully, because we want to up the quality of the road riding. And I learned a ton as I went along from many, many people. I didn't have to pay for a lot of it. And so I'm still now thinking, okay, I'm going to give that back. So that's where I'm at.
Great. And Julia brings so much racing experience, and it's fantastic just to see that being passed on to especially our youth women, where the support has typically been lacking in the past. So it's great to just have that focused team. Up next, another Board of Directors member, we have Kathleen Mcewen.
Thanks, Chantal. I started in school. I did all kinds of sports. I did all the sports, particularly curling. And then when I got to university, I did biathlon, which is skiing and shooting, and I also ran a lot. After university, I ran, like Pauline, I used my bike as a mode of transportation, normally rode to work following university, but I kept running. And I only got into cycling about 8 years ago when my husband was going to cyclocross races. I watched him race for a year, finally decided to jump in to the mix, and fell in love with it. So, I came to cycling fairly late. And it's just been interesting to see, the differences between cycling and running, and also to see, how cycling sort of treats older women, and how older women fit into competitive cycling. But that's about it.
Excellent. Kathleen checks a lot of boxes. You are a master female racer. You are married to a master male racer, and you're the mother of 2, I believe, cadet and junior racers, or now they're probably aging up. My goodness, they're growing so quickly, but it's kind of neat to get your perspective from all those different sides of things. Up next, we have one of our Team Ontario Handcyclists who got a medal at Nationals, I believe, within her first year of training. Pretty fabulous. We have Chrissy.
Hi. So I got into cycling just as a recreational cyclist back before I had an accident back in 2004. I became a paraplegic. And before that, I was a competitive runner. So I tried a bunch of different sports after I got out of rehab, and nothing really seemed to feel the same as running. I ended up getting a hand cycle donated to me when I was fresh out of rehab. And I didn't even know there was competitive hand cycling until about 4 years ago. I ended up having 3 kids and I did it recreationally. And just one day I did a search online and found out there was actually races and it could be competitive in this sport. So I started to train on my own for a few years, and I got a hand bike, and a newer hand bike. And then in January 2019, I decided to get really serious and started working with a coach. And that's when I started competing in the summer. And that's where I got the bronze medal at nationals and made development standards as well. So that's where I'm at.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chrissy.
Yeah.
Up next, she's first into the velodrome when the races begin, and she's also last out of the velodrome, a teammate of mine, Rosa Phillip.
So I've been cycling for 9 years now. I got into it after I had knee surgery from a soccer injury. I did the Ride to Conquer Cancer 1 year, and then I decided I wanted to race. So I Googled how to race your bike, and Midweek Cycling Club came up. So I joined with them at the end of 2013, and I started road racing in 2015. In 2013, I'd also tried the Forest City Velodrome, and I absolutely loved it. So when I heard that Milton was getting a track, I had to join. So I was one of the first groups certified at the Milton track in 2015, and now it's just like my second home. I've won a couple races in the elite and masters categories. In the sprint events, I'm a sprinter primarily, and the goal is to one day become masters world champion in a sprint event, and that was the goal this year, but COVID ended that. So it is in the near future, hopefully. And I also helped coach the midweek youth on the road and on the track. And I also helped coach newer riders at Midweek's Learn to Race program.
It's funny how we always seem to kind of rope in those athletes into becoming coaches. And last but not least, we have an athlete who is new to the Teams of Ontario programming. She rides tandem on the track with her partner. Oh my goodness, why am I gapping on her name? With Carrie. And she's learning a lot about track riding on the tandems, but she's already been fairly involved, I believe, with her own club, Tandem Eyes in Peterborough. We have Emilee.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Emilee. I'm based out of the Peterborough area, and I'm legally blind. I've never been able to ride a bike on my own. So about 4 years ago, I was introduced to tandem cycling. The actual first thing I really ever did on a tandem bike was a 40-kilometer ride in one day. It was a lot. But then after that, I got more involved. I completed a mini triathlon, and my favorite part was the cycling. And then I got involved with Tandem Eyes, and we did a little bit of road and trail. And I really liked that because they provided the bikes and pilots, so it made it very easy. And then just this year, I got involved in track cycling. Through my school, I had that opportunity, and I was told that I smiled the entire time that I was on the track. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. And this year I competed in provincials and got gold in both my races. I was supposed to go to nationals before all this happened.
Hopefully we're going to see nationals. It's still scheduled for November, so we'll see about a combined track nationals. Perfect. Well, thank you everybody for that nice and quick introduction. So we're just going to flow through a couple of questions that I have here. If any of the participants have anything they want to ask, feel free to type it out in the chat. That'll get sent to yours truly, and we can facilitate that within the conversation and insert that question whenever we feel appropriate. I'd love to start things off, and again, we can always go in order. So we'll start off with Pauline, just to get your take on a few things. And the first question I have to ask is, based on your background, what made you want to pursue your career within sport? I use career in quotes because nobody here, I think, is getting paid for what they do. But I use the word career because it's a little bit of a lifestyle for most of us. So kind of what happened, what made you want to pursue it? Some of you even touched it during your introduction. So feel free to just give us a little brief outline.
So I don't get paid, but I ride for Lantern Rouge, and we have a really good coffee sponsor. So there's that to it. But when I think about what actually got me into the racing aspect, I can't quite pinpoint when that happened. I was athletic as a child. I did ballet, so not exactly transferable, but the training, the routine, the kind of that element of it did transfer over when I started racing. But I'm kind of jumping ahead because I know one of the questions is like thinking about how do we get more involved. And one of the things I've thought about, and I've talked about it with other female cyclists, is why are there so many female runners but so few female cyclists who compete? And something we were talking about is often in running, you're running a personal best. You're not directly competing against the person next to you. And I think that, you know, goes beyond cycling, and it's kind of in female psychology from a number of areas. But I think, and when I, you know, go on the start line, and all the women that I know from cycling, and I'm speaking from a cyclocross perspective, but we all kind of have that in common, where we're not afraid to line up next to each other. And that's the whole purpose of the race, is to beat the person next to you. Whereas running or other sports, I think, that's a divide with men and women. And that's something that I think about in terms of how to, even in the club rides that I do in the city, is when I talk to other women, and that's kind of something that comes up very regularly, is this fear element. So I don't know exactly how to encourage more women to get onto the start line, because that is an element of racing that won't go away. But I like the adrenaline. I like the different courses. I mean, with cross, it's you know, different terrains, different things, but yeah, that's kind of, I can't pinpoint what made me want to race, but I think it definitely attracts certain people, but it's how do we get to attract more people?
That's good. You're right. It seems to take a certain type of person to want to, you know, line up next to the competition, size them up, and be able to take it. Whereas you're right, running races, and even if you look at the triathlon world, it's a 50-50 split with women, because they're more so aiming for the personal best, and it's not as, you know, the elbows aren't necessarily out. So that's a good point you bring there. Julia.
Can you repeat the question? Because we are talking about lots of different things. I think it's
so I'm
it was about what got me to
what got you to pursue your career within sport, or do you have an organization?
So why cycling, right? Because there's a lot of things we can do with our lives, right? When you start cycling, you start to realize that, you know, whichever discipline you're doing, but let's say you're just riding, it can take you to so many different places. So for example, the you know, it's like an n-dimensional space. I can take this bike and it'll take me, you know, to another town, and I will see all the farms, or I will climb the biggest mountain. And then when you start doing some other riding, maybe you bring somebody with you. So now you're sharing that. And on top of that, now maybe you're challenging each other to go faster. And so as you progress with cycling, the very nature of cycling gets you to really look at who you are. It can be all consuming. The sport it's just you start thinking about it, and where you're going to go and do something better, right? Where, you know, what should your pace be over here, or, you know, what's your position over there, and what are you doing in the pack, or how's your standing start, or, you know, what's your IP calculator saying for your laps, and it's just becomes this sport that is never ever boring. It is challenging from, you know, when I started at 22 and now I'm 52, and even when I ride today, it molds me, it shapes me, and the interactions that you make, the connections that you make, because it is arguably the hardest sport, especially when you do stage racing. Like there's nothing like stage racing. If you've done 7 to 10 days, it's like a whole other thing. It's a whole other depth of exhaustion. And then when you share that with your teammates, you share that with your DS, or you share that with mechanic, or you share that with coaches, or even you share that with your club when you come home, those connections are extremely powerful and strong. And so I still have those connections with some of the people, you know, where I started in grassroots and all the way up. And it is continually developmental. So for me, you're always learning, and you're always seeing who you are and engaging with others as they're doing that. And so for me, it's very satisfying to continue to take part in that. And if you work hard at it, maybe you make a little bit of money. Now females are making a salary when they get to the Pro Tour, and eventually when you're coaching, you can also make, you can now make more money. I don't know if you can make like a whole bunch of money, but it has improved. So the idea of like career, I think, has improved. Will it continue? I don't know, right? So, but I think now you can actually have compensation for the work that you do, either as a bike racer or as a coach, or I guess other dimensions to it, right? So that's a good thing that I think is there. It's not equal, but some of that is there.
Julia, you bring a lot of passion, not only to the race scene, but also to the coaching scene. I've witnessed it firsthand, but it's good to share that passion with others because bike racing just kind of brings everybody together. Kathleen, what's your take?
As I said earlier, I started as a runner, and even as a runner, you know, I would do my sort of recreational runs, but I also did a lot of racing. And the thing I really liked about racing with running was basically it was a party with a run thrown in the midst of it. You showed up and it was super fun, and then you'd run, and then it, you know, you'd have more of a party after that. And so going to cyclocross races, I noticed the same thing. You know, you'd show up before your race, you'd cheer on all the other races, and it was really fun. Then you'd stop for a bit and do your race. But then after that, you know, there was music and food, and it was a really great atmosphere. And all the other people racing were all really interesting, fun people. So that's sort of what I like best about racing. In running, you get a t-shirt. In cycling, you don't, which is a bit of a bummer. But really, I like the camaraderie of races. That's what I like about competing. And you know, as Julia mentioned, cycling can take you anywhere. You can commute to work, you can go on a recreational ride, and you can race. So a bike is, you know, can run the gamut of things that you can do. The other thing that I like, I don't normally do road races, but I've started in the past few years racing crits. And the thing I like about crits is the teamwork aspect of it. It's something you don't necessarily think of cycling as having a lot of, but there's a huge teamwork aspect, which I also really find interesting and challenging. But mostly I'm there to hang out and have fun with friends.
And free t-shirts. Kathleen wants a t-shirt. All right. Perfect. Thank you. Chrissy.
Yeah, so my career in sports started in running as well. It actually started back in grade 7. I didn't know I had any athletic ability at all until our gym classes where we had to start running cross country. And I started doing circles around everybody and realized I actually had some talent. So I am a very competitive person. So that whole thing about women not necessarily wanting to be competitive, I've always been very competitive. So that's my favorite thing about cycling is that it can be sort of a team sport, but it is individual too. So if you succeed, it's all you. And if you fail, it's all you. So you don't have to, so when you accomplish something, you're proud of yourself. So you know that you've accomplished it. And with team sports, I didn't find, like I played sledge hockey before and I was on the curling team and that as well. I didn't have the same feeling with my success, so.
Excellent, very good. Perfect. Rosa, what's your take on this?
Well, I'm taking like the career part as like starting out coaching. So being at the velodrome a lot, I started out volunteering a lot with the OCA for the Youth Cup races. And I was always there the day before the adult O Cup races. So I ended up being approached by the president of our club, Michael Longfield, who asked if I wanted to start coaching at the track, coaching the youth at the track. And I was really hesitant because I told him, these kids, they'll know more than me. Like, they're not going to listen to me. But he encouraged me to give it a try. So I did. And it ended up working out pretty well. And I think my experience track racing helped a lot because I can give them pointers and tell them what had worked for me in my races, especially the sprint races. And it just helped me become a little bit more confident.
I found that coaching sometimes even helps me perfect my skills more, because talking through it with somebody else, laying it out, you're like, oh, that's how that works. Yeah, I've done that before, definitely. Awesome. And Emilee, go ahead.
Yeah, so my career in sport actually started in goalball, which is a team contact sport for blind individuals. So then when I tried cycling, first of all, I love the fact that I didn't have to get hit with anything. That made it so much better. I also just kind of loved the way that I felt on the bike. It was kind of this sense of freedom as something that I've never been able to do. I also love the supportive environment that was involved with it, between like the coaches and my pilots that I've had over the years. Like, they've always been so supportive, as well as kind of opposite of what Pauline was saying, where she was saying you feel like you're racing against others. I kind of feel the opposite with Tandem, especially because there's only one of you on the track. So I always feel like I'm competing for myself against myself. And it's that level of like, every time I get a personal best, just kind of the feeling of like, I can do this, and like that kind of energy.
That brings up a really good point, and perhaps there's a difference in attendance levels in timed events versus mass start events. And I can say from my experience organizing the track races this last year, there were a lot more females, and master females especially, enrolled in the individually timed events versus the mass start events. So it could be something along the lines of, getting that best time, feeling that accomplishment. It could also be something that Pauline said, when it has to do with maybe there's that fear level, maybe they're not into that intimidation factor. So that brings up a really good point. We can talk about that in a little bit for sure. The next question I have for our panelists is, and I do see that we do have a suggested Q&A question, and we are getting to that. That's one of our questions that we're going to be covering. But the next question I have is, have you encountered any challenges along the way? This can be an injury, this can be discrimination, this can be any sort of like roadblock or problem that you've had to navigate. We'll start off with Pauline.
Sure. So as much as I've had like no challenges, the point of the question is, what are the challenges? So I'm going to be heavily negative right now. I guess one of the good things is actually how I forgot about this, how I got into more of a team and the cycling community was, I broke my leg. I was doored by a driver and I broke my leg. And then in order to, once I got my cast off, I didn't have a trainer, but there was a shop down the street, Bateman's, if anyone knows it, where they literally had a garage and that's where they did their spin shack. So I rehabbed my leg, and that's how I kind of met a team and started, I raced for them originally. But in terms of challenges, and I'm putting on the female perspective to this, like one of the first things is, my first experience at a bike shop wasn't great. And I didn't let it deter me, but it just, and I won't name the bike shop, but it just, in the back of my head, I would think like, if I was a man, would they be speaking to me this way? I'm also not very tall, and I ride a 48. And I remember I was talking to one of the reps of a bike that I had, and I said, it's really unfortunate that the 48s they're only aluminum and there's nothing better than a 105. Like, why is there an assumption that somebody who rides a smaller frame or is a woman doesn't want to have nice stuff? And even like, where are the bottles placed? I can't fit a bigger bottle on my down tube because of, they take the frame and then they shrink it without actually thinking of the usability. It's same with even kit. And when I started cycling, there wasn't that much women's specific kit. It's definitely grown over the years, and certain companies who focus on female kit, on the smaller sizes, they put 2 back pockets that are useful sizes, as opposed to putting the 3 pockets that are just miniature and you can't actually fit anything back there. So there's been definitely a lot of progress in terms of challenges from like an equipment perspective. That bike company did go on to make small carbon Ultegra and nice bikes. So I don't peg myself as being, the influencer, but at least being able to talk to them and raise that. And then from a racing perspective, I mean, how many races do we go to? And there's E4, E3, M1, all the categories, and then women, and we get one time slot. Everybody races against each other. I remember last year we were in Rochester doing a cross race, and they lumped all the women, and there happened to be about 50 of us registered, which compared to a lot of the other categories would have warranted a separation or at least our own race. But we had single speeds in there and fat bikes, and we were staged minutes apart from each other, but then our lap times, and the way cross works, it's a time-based thing, was based on the first guy who was on a single speed who went through. And it was just, so even in the race setting, there's so many challenges with like women just kind of being lumped together. My first group ride, I showed up and was like the only women, and there was 30 guys, and I got dropped real fast, but I continued to go back. And that's kind of how I did find a few other females, and that's kind of how our BOW group came to be. And I mean, last year there was mornings where there was 40 women showing up, and it was clearly there was a need for this type of group to happen. But and I'm thankful that it did. It's just, yeah, there's challenges, and I mean commuting, and one of the things with COVID that I forgot because I got so used to group riding was, now that I'm riding by myself, there's been a number of times where like a car will slow down, and just like it happened on one ride 3 times to the point where I turned around because I got like catcalled by a bunch of teenagers in a car, and then had 2 other cars that just made me feel really uncomfortable. And I forgot about that. And I did remember that happened when I rode by myself when I first started. So, you know, there's sometimes challenges that come through, and it seems very pronounced. And I'm sure there's other things that women go through, but we kind of normalize it as part of our daily lives. But yeah, I'd say across all aspects, again, there's so many great things about cycling, but we're focusing on some of the challenges. So that's kind of what I brought up.
You bring up a lot of different points there. The one thing that I noted about what you kind of first said, where, you know, you went to a bike shop and it was kind of only men, and your first bike club, you did find women, but it was mostly men. And I'm willing to bet, maybe not necessarily these panelists here, but I'm willing to bet on this call today that 90% of the people participating today were introduced to the sport of cycling by a male figure, be it a father, a friend, a husband, a brother. I started with my brother. I just started cycling because he was. So it's something to consider that we all kind of emerge into the sport under the influence of a male. And so it's sometimes hard to realize and find that female culture within the sport of cycling. Very good. Julia, have you encountered any challenges?
Yeah, Pauline just covered like a bazillion challenges, but I thank you for that, Pauline. I'm like, wow, I've really had to overcome a lot of challenges. The answer to that is yes, it's on the daily, you know, and every interaction with every person. And this is where you have to take a deep breath. And if you're going to be a leader, you're going to be running a club ride, you're going to be running a team, you're going to be running a training session, you're going to be running something on the track. It doesn't matter if you have males, it doesn't matter if you have females, it doesn't matter if you have old people or younger people, right? I think it's very important in terms of leadership as females. If you have something to offer, you offer it, and you offer it again, and you offer it again, and you offer it again. And it will, and you know, the obstacles will continue, because sometimes you do something and it shakes the ground and you didn't even know you were shaking the ground, you know, and then, you know, the people that are already in place will maybe be threatened by it. But if you're coming from a really good place, it's a very important thing, and it can be very fatiguing. It fatigues me. But at the same time, you start to see some really positive things. And when we actually have this conversation about making a change, you know, and the challenges, right? We need to include everybody. So as women, we could all sit around and talk about the challenges, and that's really important, but we want to include others, males, right? Or everybody, because really you want balance. And I can tell you, as I moved up through the ranks, I learned a ton from all kinds of people. So you look at Denise Kelly, who was national team coach, but I also learned from Mirik Mazur, who was provincial coach, right? And then I learned from athletes. And so I learned from Sue Palmer and Clara Hughes, and those are females, right? But I also learned a whole pile from Tim Hadfield and Eric Wolberg. And so it has to be everybody together, because we are all together on this. And we're fighting socialization. So for example, when Pauline says, you know, female tend to be, or, you know, talk about timed events versus group events, you know, you turn on the TV and it's Superman and he's male and look how powerful he is. And you turn on Spider-Man and he's male and look how amazing he is, right? And so it's the socialization for everybody. The male is expected to be this and the female is expected to be that, right? So you have to break the barriers. When I work with females, it's that once they get comfortable with the sense of competition and pushing themselves. So that's what Chrissy was saying, like she's already in that groove. So wherever she got it, right, she got it from somewhere. So for, and if we're just talking about female athletes and they're uncomfortable and they're not sure if, should they be that aggressive, it's up to me, let's say, because I've been in it, right, is I create the environment. I create the place to train that is safe. And now you bust out. Like you don't feel weird if you're like screaming across the line and going really hard, or you're getting aggressive with the other person behind you. And you do that gradually, because like you have to, somebody might not be ready for that. And we all have been like, you know, Pauline has said it too. You show up to a ride and there's like 90% are male if you're lucky and 10% are female. Well, when I started, I was the female. And then you're just hanging onto a wheel and you're hanging onto the wheel and then you blow off. And then the next day you show up, I'm not going to get dropped. And so you fight through that. Now we have a bit, I think we have some opportunities where it is maybe a little bit more open, but, and really like I talk about challenges for me, but when I look at some of the people on this panel and I'm like, I'm not even close to the challenges that some of these other people have experienced. So, you know, for me, if I get a little bit like, oh man, that wasn't very nice. I'm like, oh, we come through and you keep leading and you keep providing the place for athletes, and you are respectful, you are realistic, and you challenge the human, because we are all human and we have that side where we want to be challenged, because then once we go through that challenge, we feel really, really good. And that's what we, as leaders, or even as like as a peer as a competitor, you know, you can tap into that for everybody around you. So anyway, I'm going on quite a bit, so I better be quiet and go with that. But, you know, every day is challenges, every single day, and with coaching, with riding, with racing, with competition. That's a given. Yeah.
You bring up a point about getting female riders comfortable, you know, screaming across the line, being aggressive. And it's true, because, you know, society dictates the female is polite and quiet, and we don't swear and we don't say bad things.
You know what's really cool is when you actually see either of the group that you're working with, or you might know of a friend that you're riding with, and all of a sudden they really embrace like, what can they put out, right? And then sometimes it's really cool, because when I rode, it was like with the Scarborough Club, it was the donut ride. And then the guys would see me like bleed out of every orifice, right? And then I got notched in, and then I had the respect, and it takes a while to get the respect, right? And you got notched into this slot, and then they bring you into the fraternity, right? But I'm really a sorority. I don't know what it is, but you get into it, and then they recognize it. And then you start to make bonds with those people, because it's about the sport, right? You're human and you're cycling. And when you can have that engagement, then it's really, really good, right? And that's kind of what the conversation or the approach that I take.
Yeah. And you also came from a time when you really did have to prove yourself, and you were the only female.
I was the only female. Like my first coach, Polish national team, and this is not Mirek, this is Ziggy Martuzowski. He was on the track, Polish national team, did the peace race, and I would do 45K. He goes, Julia, what are you doing? You can't go over 40K. I'm like, I don't know. My ovaries are fine. And then we go to 60K, and I was actually teaching him as we went along. And then, you know, because he had never been around female cyclists, right? So, and I had never even, I didn't know what 80K was, right? So sometimes you're educating, as you're doing your thing, you're actually educating and breaking ground. And it can be tiring. That's kind of like, why do I always have to do that? But really, when I look at the other people on this panel, I should be quiet, because they're the jungle they're cutting the swath through is way thicker than mine, right? So for me, I always put it in perspective, right? I have privilege. I can get into areas. And so I want to continue the work. And when you see the change in the athlete, and it doesn't matter for me if it's male or female, or everything else, right? It's a beautiful thing, right? So for us, if we're going to be leaders, we just keep going. We get the obstacle, we work through it. We get the obstacle, and we get through it.
Awesome. Lead by example. Perfect. Kathleen, what's your take? Have you had challenges?
I'm sure, probably. I agree with Pauline's point with respect to bike shops. Like, cycling is a fairly elitist sport, in that you walk into a bike shop, you have no idea what it is that you need. If you're looking to commute, then you can probably be sold a decent commuter. But if you think you want to go fast and you walk into this male-dominated bike shop, they're going to oversell you or undersell you. So you end up not getting the right thing, which means that your experience is not as good as it could be. And then from the racing standpoint, as Pauline mentioned, they race all the women together regardless of ability. When I started racing cyclocross, we raced with the M2 or M3 men, which was kind of all right, because there were a bunch of people. I didn't have to worry about whether I was last or not, because it was everybody just racing. Eventually they separated out the women's races, but then there were the elite women and there was me. So then I had to worry about getting pulled. When I was racing with the men, I didn't have to worry about getting pulled. They're like, oh, there she is, and it's fine. But then the issue with the women's races is, because all the women are racing as one, because they say, well, we have got a women's race, but you're all racing together. That means that there are elite women, junior women, and then the master women. And so we're all racing the same. And in cyclocross, and I think in some crits and some road races as well, you do a bunch of loops. And then just based on the leader's time, if you're not within that time, they'll pull you from the race. So that's a concern for a lot of master women, who are obviously not necessarily as fast as the junior or elite. So you've paid your money, you've showed up at a race, you're really gung-ho to race, you're very competitive, but obviously you're not as fast as the elite women. So then you get pulled, which is really not, it's not a very motivating experience. And I think that's one of the barriers that to master women is anyway. And there are a lot of master women out there who, their kids are getting into cycling and they're standing on the sidelines thinking that they might like to try cycling as well. But then if they go to a race, they see, oh, look at this woman's getting pulled. She paid $80 for a race and she's getting pulled. Or she's getting lapped a million times by the elite women. So it's really demotivating for a lot of master women to get into it. And as Chrissy said, we're as competitive as anybody else. We want to do as well as anyone else, but to go all that way, to put in all that effort simply to get pulled right away is really demoralizing. So I think that's, as a master woman, that's a barrier for sure to getting more women into the competitive side of the sport.
I bet your mastermen would have a real big problem if they were stuck measuring up to the E1-2 men. And we had, 60-year-old master man out there and he got pulled because of that. They'd have a problem with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If you had the M3 men racing against the elite men and they're getting pulled based on Gunnar Holmgren's lap time, they wouldn't be happy.
Excellent. All right, Chrissy, have you encountered any challenges along the way, whether it be physical challenges or being in a, kind of predominantly male sport?
Yeah, so before even getting to the cycling challenges, I'm a stay-at-home mom of 3 kids. So I'm pretty much the full-time mom. And cleaning the house, like I'm like the domestic one. So just the challenge of being able to have time to train and then get out and actually do races is a challenge on its own. So I like the divide between male and female chores and everything like that is still not equal. So that's the first step. So getting out the door and being able to compete at all is a challenge. And then, once we're actually out and racing, we have the same issues with hand cycling, with the division between the men and the women. I've done races where there wasn't even a women's division. I just raced with men, and I had no hope of winning or doing anything, but I just went out for the experience. And I've done races where there's been a women's division. They have all the classifications for the men, and then it's just women. So there is me as a hand cyclist. I'm a higher level. So I could have been racing against someone with a higher level injury than me, and also against someone on a trike, which is completely not the same thing at all. So challenges that way. And also with Bike Fit, I just bought a carbon bike, and it was supposed to be designed for me, but I'm still having some fit issues. I have boobs, so, the crank and that, it's not having some issues that way. And then also just the actual fit, like it could have been a smaller bike, and I wouldn't have to prop myself up as much. So if it was actually a smaller bike that perfectly fit me, I wouldn't have to make so many adjustments just to be able to have a proper fit.
Those boobs just get in the way. So those are some physical challenges, but also I do love that you brought up the fact that you are a mother of 3, and you're responsible for them. You bring them to school. You are cleaning the house. You are making the meals. And there are people on this call who I know are in a very similar situation. And it's like, when am I going to train? Like, and I mean, Kathleen, who spoke before, I mean, her whole family's in cycling. So, is it fair that she maybe gets put in that homemaker role where why does she have to be the one that cleans the house? Why doesn't everybody type thing? So that's a barrier that definitely has to be broken down. And how do you deal with that? So that's good. Excellent. Rosa.
So I'm taking the track side of this again. So I guess now it's not unique to track. I've heard it's happened in other cycling disciplines as well, but many times women are forced to race with the men in track, and especially happened this year. And I know it's a numbers game, and there needs to be a certain amount of women to hold a feasible race, especially because the track is so expensive. But so a lot of times the women do have to race with the men. Even being an experienced track cyclist, or call myself experienced, I do get intimidated when I have to race with the men. They're bigger, they're stronger. So I can only imagine what a newer rider would feel like. And I know it's a long-standing problem, especially in track, but I do think that if you promote women's racing and you make it available, then women will show up. So for example, midweek, when I started at midweek, there was just mixed racing for the crit. But in the past couple of years, we've had guaranteed women's fields for at least 12 weeks in the summer, and women show up, and no matter how few women there are, we race, and we race with women. And I think it's a good stepping stone for women who are just starting to race before they step into an O-Cup. So it's less intimidating.
Absolutely. I think, and every year that midweek women's crit does grow, and you're right, the newer riders, whether it be junior women or master women, it is a good stepping stone. If they had to just jump right into racing in this very crowded pack of 70, 6+ foot tall men, it's a little bit intimidating. So it's nice to be with people who are of similar size. I don't like the fact that I don't get a very good draft in those races, but that's another story. All right, Emilee, what kind of challenges have you experienced?
Yeah, so I'm going to take kind of more of the disability side of this than the women's side of this. But my biggest challenge by far is access to a tandem bike, access to a pilot. Like I can train on a stationary, but it's not the same as actually going out. So kind of dealing with that and taking any opportunity that I can to get on a bike, but those don't come around, especially now with the situation. We're not 6 feet apart, so we're not allowed to tandem bike. We can't go out in those group rides. And also when we're racing, this kind of goes for both men and women in the disability, but there's not a lot of people to race against. I know we were talking about this kind of with the women, how sometimes we're like the only women, but there's just not people to race against in the tandem category. At provincials, there's 2 other girls that I could race against. So that kind of limits in the sport. And then, like I said, access to just bikes in itself.
That's good. Yeah, in the para world especially, it's just the word accessibility is huge.
Yeah.
So be it even a lift to get to where you need to go to train, be it a pilot, like you said, you're living in Peterborough, it's hard to find a pilot, or at least access to a competitive pilot. I'm sure you have pilot options, but if you're wanting to train,
my pilot lives 2.5 hours away.
Yeah. So having access to, access is a big name there. And Christy talked about it too, in terms of her bike, although they may not admit the bike was probably built for a man, those hand bikes don't exactly take into account the fact that we have chests. So we can't bring our hands in as close as we would want to. So yeah, access is huge. Excellent. So that was Julia has something to say. Julia, go ahead.
It's a bit of a catch-22 with the racing. So for example, you go to the race and then there's no legitimate category for you. So then you don't show up to the race. And then the next organizer says, well, I put a category and none of you showed up. So, and so what needs to happen is like a complete shift in thinking that you legitimize the race for this group and you legitimize the race for this group. And so having that women's race at midweek is a good example of starting to legitimize it, right? And it's for sure, it's like you're on a full plat, you're on a 2 or 3% grade, and the wind is in your face when you're with that. The good thing is that, for example, in some other places there is that enthusiasm for, let's say, the women's categories, and so there are places, typically US Racing does validate female racing a little bit more. There's a little bit of a different shift to it. So it's definitely something where the organizer can be supported so that they will legitimize that category. But yeah, I mean, when Kathleen talks about it, she's bang on. She's going to be racing with Holmgren or whoever it is, right? So that's not an easy thing. Perhaps it could be that we prepare the athletes so they kind of know what they're going into. Okay, this is the race, and these are the kinds of people that are going to be in your race, so you can get ready. But again, if the support is not there from the community, many women will then, or whoever, will just go and do their own thing. They'll go do their own ride, or they'll go do the club ride that Pauline puts on, because that's a totally cool place to go for them. So we're in definitely a catch-22, and that's going to take a big change, social change, right?
It's interesting you say that, because for instance, again, this previous track season, I kind of took over organizing the track races. I've been a part of the track races since the track was built, but and I was kind of set with this, all right, well, what do we do with the women's categories? Because we have some women that, I need the competition of a man, I need a faster, speedier competition, and we have some women that are more timid and maybe not wanting to race with the men. And go ahead, Julia.
They race both. So when I started, I was allowed to race elite 1-2 men if I felt like I could go into that race, and I could race the women's race. Now, of course, I didn't start doing that, right? You work your way through, and then the commissars know who you are. And then somehow all of that changed, so that if you were, let's say, a top level female, you can't do those races, or you have your own race, but then all of a sudden in this race, we're going to put you all together. And that's in the same season. And again, it's for numbers, right? So that will require some open-minded thinking, where if you have an athlete who is at the highest level, if they could race the elite 1-2, or they could race the M1, or something like that, where it's something that grooves with their level, then it works. So Kathleen said the same thing when she raced with M3, I think you were saying, Kathleen, or I could be right. Maybe that was like a place where you could get pushed. And this is critical because, man, you go to a race and you pay $100 and you only get to do 40K, where the other guy pays $100 and he gets to do 160K in a pack of 140 people. You know, maybe you only show up and there's a pack of 10 people and the experience is completely different and you pay exactly the same thing, right? So the way you do that is if you have riders that can fill all of these categories and still race there, that's a potential. And I'm probably going to be shut down completely for saying that. But anyway.
This last track season, it's funny you say that. We actually presented that opportunity. So what we did is we provided the opportunity for women to join. It was ability-based racing. I believe it was categories A through F, with F standing for female, F being only female. So the faster females.
So you can't make the girls F. You got to make them A, right? The whole
thing
F with the, right?
I know.
Right, so that already makes you feel like you're at the end of the line, or what does that letter mean?
That was the issue we experienced was, so our faster females, there was a mix between, I would say like 20 to 30% of them were like, yeah, I want to race with the men and kick their butts. And then there was that, 70% of, I'm talking faster females who were like, well, I don't want to race the men. I want to race the people I'm going to be racing at provincials. And then nobody wanted to be in this group F because nobody wanted to be the last or the slowest or admit that they were necessarily the slowest. Now, O Cup number 3, we tried a slightly different method. O Cup number 3, we split the women, and the women were A and B. And even within that, when they selected registration based on previous race results, we would kind of be like, oh.
So you give them everything.
Yeah.
You give them their own race with money, right? All women and prize money. And after they're done their race, they can go into the Elite 1-2 race, right?
So actually,
I don't even know if that's possible, but then I would do that. I'd be like, okay, I'm going to go and support the women's race, and we're going to race, and maybe I get a new helmet or socks, or one year was perfume. And then I go to the, now I go to the Elite 1-2, and I get, my heart rate is above threshold the entire time. I am kissing my stem, and I'm kissing my stem, and then I finish, I'm like, oh, that was good. It was terrible, and it was good. And then I get that race to elevate my maybe physicality or my technical aspect, right, or tactical aspect. But you give them both, and I probably will. Nobody will say, yeah, Julia, we're going to do that. I don't think anybody's going to do that at a race, but we could, and I've done it. I've raced multiple categories where I've raced the female race. And then I even was able to start the Elite 1-2 race, and I could be in that pack for even one or 2 hours and get that benefit, right? So I don't know, that did the trick for sure in the past.
Yeah, and I mean, we're trying to experiment with different ways, but that actually leads nicely into the next conversation I want to have. And we call this conference that we're having right now inclusivity and diversity, but let's talk about equity. So Julia's kind of already brought up a couple ideas on equity in terms of pricing or allowing different challenges. Again, we talked about how men have their Elite 1-2 category, Elite 3, Elite 4, and if you're above the age of 35, you have M1, M2, M3. Now, although women have Elite 1-2, Elite 3, and Master, sometimes Master's divided into A and B. They're all stuck racing together. So let's talk equity, and we can start with Pauline if you have any thoughts. And again, throughout this panel here, if you don't have too much to say about it, you can just say, you know what, I agree with so-and-so, let's move it on to the next person. So we'll start with Pauline, and what do you have to say?
Yeah, I was going to say what Julie was just speaking about is a good segue into equity. And it's not about what can we give the women that's equal to the men, because it's not an equal playing field. So what is being offered does have to be different to recognize that we're not starting at the same place. And just a little flip side of what Kathleen was saying is, as being a force to be an elite rider because of age, it can also be super intimidating. You know, a 20-year-old who's showing up to their first bike race and is forced to race the elite category is racing against, you know, the Jen Jacksons and the Haley Smiths. Like, I remember standing next to Haley Smith on the start line and just being like, oh my God, like, I know who she is, and how, you know, mountain biking, like, she medaled last year at a World Cup. So there is also that element that it's not just like the masters who feel it. So to the point of the category or the ability-based type of racing would be good in that. And in terms of equity, like, I was thinking about this, and I don't have any necessarily suggestions of like what we can do, but it's just how to keep a mindset of when we look at stuff. And to speak from a work perspective of, you know, right now in Toronto, there's all this, they're doing quiet streets and active TO and looking at where they're putting in bike lanes. And through a lot of these discussions, you know, they've put bike lanes in areas and then being like, oh, but nobody's using them. And it goes to the point of equity, because, you know, putting in a paint line in a place in Scarborough or kind of the outer boroughs of Toronto, the cars drive very fast there. Like, it's a very different demographic. So by putting a lane and not seeing, well, why isn't it the same ridership as a place like Bloor? Like, that's just like, you're not, like, it's not being looked at it from, well, what is the baseline here? And I think with looking at how to include women, not to just in racing, but how to get more women on bikes, it has to look at, we can't just think of how do men get into bikes and then apply that and assume it's going to work the same, because that's just not going to work. And I think Julia had mentioned it before, is like, to have these conversations, we do have to have a broad perspective of people if the intended outcome is to get more female participants riding and racing and club rides and even just recreational or for transportation. Like, it takes both asking what are the needs and how to do that, and then also involving men or involving people who are not necessarily the target group, because that can be through allyship or just also, you know, expanding. I think of some male friends that I have, and when I first started riding with them and getting to know them, you know, if I was dropping off the back and somebody came to pull me back up, I would just kind of question to them, like, did you do that because I was a woman, or would you have still done that if I was a man? And thankfully, the people I ride with are good humans, and they said, like, you know, no, like, it did cause them to question, and then they stopped and said, yeah, no, I probably still would have done that, but thank you for, you know, making me even think about that. So it kind of goes into asking the people that we're wanting to include, but also keeping more people in the conversation.
That's good to think about. Now we're going to move on to Julia. And I know Julia has a lot to say about this, because, I mean, she's experienced it and she's seen the transition, and we are getting better, but very, very slowly. The other thing we want to think about is in terms of equity. I'm actually going to just give one quick example about para racing, actually. So I had been previously approached by some para racers, and they said, well, why aren't there more para races in Ontario? And I said, well, there are some. We have some. We have about 5, you know, if this was not a year with COVID. We have some races. They're around. Well, there needs to be more. Okay, well, the thing is, we need to have the bodies show up, right? So, for instance, last season, 2019, I was in contact, I believe, with the, it was either Quinty, it was the Quinty road race. So yes, Quinty's out in the east area. I made a deal with the organizer. We arranged a separate time to have that race for the hand cycles. I think it was hand cycles and tandems, and they gave us like a 45-minute or an hour slot. Now, to put it in perspective, police cost about $150 an hour. And to run this race, they needed about at least 8 policemen. So this is a lot of an hourly cost to put on this race. And I got the organizer to do this. They put it in their tech guide, and I had 2 people show up or sign up, actually. Chrissy was one, and she was probably coming from one of the furthest destinations. And another person who lived in St. Catharines was the other one. And I went, we can't run this race. We can't. And we had to cancel it, because with 2 people, number one, it's a bit of a silly looking race. It's not very competitive race, they could just go and do that on the road. And it would have killed the race organizer. They would have never been interested again in holding that race. So it is that chicken and the egg conversation that Julia brought up of, you present this race opportunity, but maybe not a lot of women show up. Is it because they didn't know about it? Is it because it's new? They're scared? Who knows? It's that chicken and the egg opportunity. I created a new race. Nobody signed up. The race organizer is no longer interested in doing it. So it is something to keep in mind when we're talking about, you know, potentially holding separate starts for the women. That's good. I like that idea. It's no fun to be standing on the line with, you know, Haley Smith going like, well, I'm going to be lapped every second lap. But the question is it feasible for the race organizer to do 2 whole separate starts, maybe during different time slots? Or do we need to somehow maybe have just separated starts, maybe no pulling of the women, things like that? Things to think about. Go ahead, Julia.
Wow. Okay. There's a lot of things that you hit on there. I think people need to buy into the fact that having a category that maybe is not attended well is something that needs to be put on, because it does not take away from the other categories. It augments the other categories, the balance, right? And so that's the mindset, I think, that if you have, you know, lots of females racing, with these categories that we have, so lots of females racing versus lots of male racing, like that just rounds out the whole race. And you see that, let's just use the Pro Tour. You go to Flèche Wallonne, right? You have the men's race and you have the women's race. It's like way better, right? And sometimes they have it on a Saturday and a Sunday. And now, you know, you're saying to me, well, we put on the race, Julia. I organized it, right? And it's like a lot of energy for you to organize and get the police or get registration and all of these things, right? And so what it takes there is advanced preparation. If I was running a women's race, which I have no idea how to run, by the way, if I had, right, I invite every single female in the province. And then I invite the right people to come to that race. I invite them, and maybe I say, you know, come to this race. Here's what is going to be available to you. And you do that with the hand cycling. You do that with tandem racing. You do that with all of these categories. And then people are going, wow, I got invited. And maybe you take $2 off the entry fee, right? Just little tiny things. And then people feel like they are not the side salad. They are not the side salad. And that's what it takes. It's like, my race is important and I am treated seriously. My effort on the bike is treated seriously. And so it's like the work before. And so if you don't have that enthusiasm, you don't have that environment yet, that's the other piece to work. And it is more work. If you go to Quebec, the juniors, the females are racing and the males are racing, and the clubs have males and females, right? So, and I'm not sure BC, you could go check in BC. And so that's the extra piece, right? The extra piece. And it wouldn't really take a whole lot. And it is validating when the race happens, it is validating that race. Because if I go all the way and I drive 3 hours and then you do that race and everybody's like, oh yeah, that race is like, yeah, it's over. Thank you very much. Now let's get to the real race, right? That race, whatever it is, right? It could be your Masters Women. It could be the same thing here with the para or hand. You validate that race and then people just keep coming back. And it's hard because you have to do it a year and then another year and then another year, right? So that work that you're doing with that female race for midweek, I bet you if you put it on a Wednesday night, which maybe you can't do it, right? Wednesday night, full on women's racing, $100 for the winner, bada bing, bada boom. I'm going to go. I'm going to bring athletes. Clubs are going to bring their athletes. It's just that piece right there is for women, right? And there was a race in Altoona. It was 7 days long, and the women had the premier start time. The men started at freaking 7:30 in the morning, and the prize money was equal. And we did exactly the same courses. So I did 160K and I did 3 freaking mountain climbs the last day. And my ovaries are still in my body, I think. And all these women came, the Europeans came, some of the Euros came, Saturn was there, and it was a full-on show, and the city came out and watched, right? So you have to establish that environment, and that's a lot of work. It's, again, you're on the grade, right? So it's doable, and I have faith that it can be done, but it's definitely very tiring. Okay, I've said a lot. Let some of these other people chat.
I like the idea with switching up the start times. Like typically, again, many years ago, there was one women's wave and it was the earliest start of the day. We are progressively seeing that moving back. And in cyclocross, the women's start is it not second last? It is second last. And then the Elite 1, 2, and M1 men are the premier spot, being the 2 or 3 p.m. start.
There was one race on the calendar, and this is road racing, where the women were taken very seriously. That was the Steve Bauer Classic. Yeah. That race, and I'm not saying there aren't other races. Maybe you guys would know more about mountain bike side and cross and the other disciplines and stuff. And so some of the top women would show up to that race.
And you know what? And the race organizer fought hard to make sure that the women, the elite women, were racing that premier spot at the same time as the elite men. And I remember when they were fighting for it, they were fighting so hard because you don't do that. Well,
and so the question is, when that happened, did it take away from the men's race? And the answer is no. It was just a stupendous show. The men would go through awesome, and then the women would go through and awesome, right? So Steve Bauer,
yep.
The guy knows cycling. He's had the yellow jersey for 10 days in the Tour de France, and he was second at the World Championships I don't know how many times. That guy has it. That guy has the idea, right? And so we need more of that.
Yeah, perfect. And his wife. She knows what she's doing. Jose knows. All right, Kathleen, any thoughts on equity within cycling?
Yeah, a couple. Just touching on Julia's point about sort of making space in a race. There were a couple of years ago, the USA Crit Series was televised. So I watched it, and in the US, races are done by category. So not necessarily master elite, but Cat 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the Cat 5 women had their own race televised. It was super early in the morning, but there were 4 women in the Cat 5 women's race. They got their full hour, they got their time, they were on TV, and then there was the Cat 4 women's race. So they didn't cancel the race because there were only 4 people. They held the race, they were televised, everybody got the same prize money. They had Cat 1 to 5 women, Cat 1 to 5 men, everything was equal. And I agree with Julia, it's one of those, if you build it, they will come. So maybe the first year there's only 4 women, but then the next year everybody sees that, oh my God, they had their own race and it was televised and they got equal prize money. So we're going to go too. The other issue I think is marketing. Oh, sorry. The other issue is marketing. Like if you look at running races, sorry. If you look
it's not a Zoom call unless there are pets involved.
He broke in. If you look at running races, you see posters everywhere. If you look at triathlons, you see posters everywhere leading up to the race. So you don't actually need to know anyone. You say, there's a poster, oh, I'm going to register there. But for cycling, it seems to me that you need to know someone to find out about a race. So I think organizers need to do a better job of marketing just to the wider world. And we need to sort of empower organizers to have a beginner category so that if they put a poster out there, or Facebook marketing or Instagram marketing saying, there's a race, if you have a bike, bring your bike, it's going to be awesome. And sort of that's how you get more people into racing. The other issue was in terms of equity, as Chrissy was saying that, a lot of domestic goings on are fairly gendered in my house as well. So, you have to deal with the kids and find time to train and then find time to race as well. And I remember when I started out in cyclocross, as I said, the women raced with the M3 men. So my husband was an M3 man and I was a woman. So we raced at the same time. So luckily cyclocross is organized such that it's in a big loop and there's usually a playground in the middle because it's usually in a park. So, we would park our kids in the playground, tell them to stay there, tell everyone these are our kids, you know, if they're going to hurt themselves, let us know. And so, you know, as I was riding by, I'd yell at them, hey, how's it going? So like those are other things that need to be considered when planning events. You know, are they compatible with you know, two people, you know, two parents competing, or you know, are there things for kids to do at a race? You know, I've been to some road races where there's nothing to do. You show up at the hockey arena, you race, you go home. So if you have to bring your kid, what do you do with your kid? There's, you know, so that's something else to consider, in addition to figuring out when to train, as Chrissy said.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Awesome. I love all those points, and I do like how again, like each panelist kind of brings a little bit of a different background, a little bit of a different story, perhaps different hardships to the table, and they can speak from their own experience. Let's hear what Chrissy has to say.
I'm in full agreement with what Julia was saying, just about having women's only races. I think that's a perfect idea. Like if you build it, they will come. So if more women find out there's like women's only races, and some women are, it's like they have women's only gyms. A lot of women might just be intimidated to be around a bunch of guys to begin with. So if there were women's only races, they might feel more comfortable coming out and just trying the sport to begin with.
Awesome. Very good. Yeah, I think you're right. We're going to cover one of those questions about just kind of how do we build up the sport in a further question, but let's hear what Rosa and then Emilee have to say, and we'll move to the next question. Go ahead, Rosa.
I don't have much more to say on the equity part. I think I said it in my last topic, but so I'll pass on.
Okay, Emilee.
Yeah, kind of same thing. I really just kind of agree with everything that's been said, like promoting the races more as like the women's only and like the para races and all that sort of thing. So I will just let us move forward.
Perfect. So it's easy to say that there's not enough diversity within cycling, especially, I mean, let's start from the bigger picture here. Cycling itself is not the most popular sport in Canada, let's say. We got hockey, you know, there's football, there's these sports. So cycling is not the top of our minds as society as a whole. I mean, in Europe, different question, whole different picture there. So Julia kind of brings a good point of like, Kathleen and Julia talked about this, where the organizer needs to kind of market this to the public. And it's tough because it's not that, you know, it's not a football game, it's not a hockey game. Not everybody owns a bike, not everybody thinks they can. Maybe it's not as popular of a sport, but it is interesting that living in a country where cycling is kind of like not one of the most popular sports. Now we go and look at the sport of cycling, and women in cycling is, there's just not enough diversity. There's not enough women in cycling. So we obviously need to grow the number of women in cycling, but also when we talk about the ethnicities or abilities of those within the world of cycling, it's just, we're not diverse enough. When you look at a cycling race, I don't feel that looking at the competitors on the line is a good measure of the race representation in our society, or the ability representation in our society. And I want to have a little conversation now about where do we think this problem kind of lies. I have a couple options here, and the answer may be neither of the two, but the two I thought of is, do you think the problem with cycling not being as diverse, do you think that lies within the need for maybe more education and outreach to these diverse groups to become cyclists, that cycling is an option? Or is there a physical holding back of or exclusion of various minority groups? Like what do we need to combat here to increase diversity within cycling? Pauline.
So I'll start with what I think is a very obvious one, is the price point. Cycling is extremely expensive. Nobody races or rides a bike that's less than, you know, a couple $1,000s, and then you have the shoes and the kit and all this stuff. So I mean, for starters, there's a huge income barrier with a lot of people to get into the road, or not even just road cycling, but beyond having a beater commuter and getting around town. And I think that has implications in a lot of other different types of marginalized groups. And because there's the lack of, I don't see myself there, how do I even know that it exists? And I was having a conversation about this actually with a friend the other day who comes from a club that is quite big and has a lot of financial resources. And they were trying to talk about how do we get more inclusion in cycling. And we were discussing, like, because there's such a financial barrier, like, is that where you actually start? Is like, do you start with how to get people on bikes for recreation, for commuting, before you even get anywhere close to expanding it from a sport perspective? Because if you look at places where they do have a lot of cycling, specifically in European countries, there's both the culture of cycling as a day-to-day, this is how I do my life, and then they do have really good development teams. And I'm speaking from a cross perspective, but it's like, why do we have so many really strong Dutch women in the cross scene and not as many Belgian? I mean, they're the two nations that are predominantly in cross. And I mean, I dug into it a bit more, and it's like, well, the development teams and the programs that they do for the Dutch women are much stronger than the Belgian counterparts. And then it shows with the caliber of racing. So if you increase the talent pool, you're going to get better talent and better. And thinking about this, so one of the discussions we had, so it's myself and a couple other people who started the BOW group, and, you know, the first thing that came to mind, and I shouldn't necessarily be saying this from an OCA Board of Directors perspective, but we said, you know, we're targeting people that, do we want to put on an added cost of even having a club fee? Like that could be the make or break for somebody showing up to a ride, is they can't afford that. And I'm seeing, you know, Toronto's a big city, and there are a lot of these other groups, and I see much more diverse groups on a range of bikes, of, you know, showing up on Canadian Tire bikes, that in time, maybe those people do go on to buy better bikes and get into cycling, but maybe they don't. And it's, what is our endpoint when we say diversity and inclusion in cycling? And if we specifically mean like the road cycling or the like, or the high end, then like, I don't know how we'll get there if we don't start looking at why is cycling as a whole not more part of culture and like moving around. And I've lived in other parts of the world where most people get around on bikes. Like, I've lived in Southeast Asia for a number of years, and I had a bicycle, and everyone had a bicycle there. And I wasn't a road cyclist there. I didn't even know about the road scenes there, but they did exist. But like, it's a hard question. And I also think it's hard for people who are already in it to be trying to brainstorming or doing all the thinking of how do we get more people involved, without talking to who is it that we actually want to get in more involved, and asking them the questions and asking what is the barriers for them, I think would be more beneficial than just because we might not even be seeing the problem in the same way, right? So it's like, how do we identify the problem? It's like, there needs to be a lot more people involved.
Excellent, thank you. Julia, do you have a take on this?
Well, I have some experiences I guess I can share, and then we can go from there. So in my other life, I'm a school teacher, a high school teacher, and I decided that at my school, I was going to make a cycling club. And probably the makeup of my school, it's in Peel region, and so probably have 70 or 80% Muslim from various countries. So we have South Asian and we have Middle Eastern, and so culturally, if you generalize, they very much academically focused. And I said, well, let's just ride on Fridays, and I don't care what bike you come on. And I had every single kind of bike. And so the first two sessions was making sure they had their saddles kind of in the right place. And some students were coming with like their younger brother's bike or their younger sister's bike. And as long as it was relatively safe with the helmet on, every Friday we would go and ride. and we'd finish with freezies as it got hotter, right? And we'd do like some of the bike lanes, and it was hard finding the bike lanes. And out of that, I think I had 2 riders that decided they were going to go and do cycling week. So that was like the whole community of using bikes to get around. And they also went and started riding at Counsel and doing some racing. So that was that. And I pretty much had Canadian Tire bikes or less. And then, okay, I get a call from the OCA, Julia, we're doing a project and we're going to start working with these juniors. And then give me the juniors a month before. I need the juniors for a month. We don't have any money. Just, okay, I don't care. Bring the juniors a month. Once a week we get together. There's no chance we're going to ever work together unless we get them together. Don't worry about paying me. And then those riders, you know, they come with a $7,000 to $8,000 bike, and they have disc wheels, and they have a time trial, and they have the aero helmet, and they have the best clothing, and they have essentially better equipment than I have now. And so it's like these 2 extremes, and they're 16 years old, and the parents are buying them everything. And every single one of those riders is white. Every single rider is white, right? And so I'm like, yeah. So as a coach, I'm like, man, we are missing out on a giant pool of genetics, right? We got to scope the neighborhoods, and there's a little, and I looked, there's like a little tiny programming for that, like to try and bring athletes from everywhere, right? So culturally, we're not a cycling nation. And the way we have set it up, and I don't understand it all because I'm a science teacher, I don't really understand all of the socialism and stuff like that, but we have not made it accessible. So, you know, what I would say is every student in the schools around the track should be able to go to the track for free and get a track bike for free and get a helmet for free and get the coaching for free. I have no idea how to do that. I offer it for free. I do all my stuff for free. Even the team I do now, when I do the coaching, I don't charge. I don't charge putting air in somebody's tire. I don't charge like helping them change a flat, right? They're youth, right? I don't charge. And everybody's like, you're crazy, Julia, you're getting used. You're gonna get used. And I'm like, yeah, but the athlete knows I help them, right? And so this is the mentality that you might see, let's say in Holland, that Pauline's talking about. Everybody is invested. And it's much easier for those countries because they're small, right? Holland is a small country and condensed. And they're also, you know, monoculture, right? They're probably not accessing immigrants from there. But Canada is a country of immigrants. People just keep coming in waves because they're leaving places that are dangerous. And these are all people that can do sport, right? And I have no idea how that would be done, but I don't really understand all the theory that it needs to be at the federal level. And man, does it need to be at the provincial level?
And you bring an excellent point though, like when describing your students at your school, you know, from different backgrounds, different ethnicities, and the idea that like cycling wasn't even a thought in and the thing is, once they start riding,
but once they start riding, you got the hair going, the wind going through their hair and the bug going into the teeth. And then they got a little sprint, you know, through the bushes or whatever. And then they liven up. It doesn't matter who they are. They're human. They're being challenged and they feel the magic of the bike, right? So we are not, accessing the pool of people. Of course, I'm thinking high performance, like I need, right, like these people, but all the other people underneath support, like, I don't care if you're M3 or you're E2, like, you know, if we only coach people that have talent, that's a very small number of people, right? And that's ridiculous. Like, I don't care who you give me. When I do projects like, Julia, you don't choose, we just give you. And I'm like, I don't care, just give me. I would take that rider and make them better, right? And so, and we need we need everybody underneath, right down to the recreational rider, to the person that's racing locally, regionally, to the person that's racing in North America, to the person that's racing throughout the world, right?
And that seems to be a big step though between your, like you said, Canadian Tire bike is probably the best bike you had to
I can't get them the bikes, right?
$5,000 disc.
I didn't care. I mean, bring me your bike. We just need to make sure there's air in that tire. The wheel needs to be round for the most part. It rubs the brake a little bit. It's still safe, and we go.
We need somebody like you at every one of those schools that we have. Just somebody to run like a little cycling club, and then we can build it.
Right. So every club, and this is what I would put to every club, and probably now people will be like, Julia's crazy. Like every club man, the people coming in, you should have a fleet of bikes. So Hamilton Cycling Club had a fleet of bikes. You have a 15-year-old who doesn't have a bike, just get them on a bike with 105 or get them on a bike with Sora and aluminum. And then they start riding, right? And then it doesn't matter if their family has money or they don't have money. And the way it's set up now, if you make the provincial team, you gotta pay. You gotta pay a lot. I didn't have to pay. I don't know what's going on, but I got to go to nationals free. When I made the national team, then I got my kit sent to me. I sat in it in my living room. I was like, look at me, right? And then you get the plane ticket. Now we don't have plane tickets, right? And then you go. And so I don't understand the system now. I don't understand it, but I know that we will not bring people into the sport unless you make it available, right? So for the Milton track, and I don't know much about the track. I only go there every so often. Imagine if you are 14, 15, and you can just go on the track and your parents don't have to pay and find equipment. And then we would have many more people returning to the track. And then you join a club and the club can get you a bike and you use that bike. And then eventually you can move on from that and get your own bike. And then same thing with, blind or para, you would have and this is crazy because those bikes are like very specific, right? So you go to the blind school, let's say in Brantford, and then you have a fleet of tandems. And I don't even know if that's possible, right? But then you can bring those riders there and then bring them, the ones that are going to do more, you bring them to the track. But these are
you know what, actually, you literally just described kind of the program we have with the school.
That's exactly what we do.
It's volunteer based, but they have a lot of teachers and helpers within school that they have like the basic like your parents or grandparents ride like the double tandem for fun.
Yeah.
And then we take those athletes like Emilee who show
when
promise
I go to
and let's do more.
Right. And when you go to the States, like I've seen, they get free helmets. And I don't know, maybe they have more money. I mean, we can't go to the States now. Don't go to the States now. But before and there would be free helmets because that is a limiter. You don't have a helmet, you can't ride, right? You can't ride. And I was crazy. I kept all my old stuff thinking, oh, when I get really old, which I'm really old now, right? I'm really old, right? So I have this stuff and I'm like, oh, when I meet a junior, I'll give them this stuff. And now when I meet the juniors, I'm like, I'm not giving them their stuff. They have like super carbon wheels with like the bug helmet and they only race in speed suits. And I'm like, okay, I can't help them because these people already have everything, right?
Yeah,
and so
reaching those who need the help. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good.
And I don't know how to do that. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Julia. Yeah. I think what she is saying is right along that track. It's the outreach, it's reaching that audience. Not every single school is fortunate enough to have a teacher who is passionate about cycling, such as Julia, and available with that amount of time to help those. But then, what's the next step? How do we get from that Canadian Tire bike to that $5,000 bike? What's the next step? I know there are a lot of clubs that do have kind of that they have connections, they have bikes reserved. Oh, I have a friend, they're not using their bike, let's get you on a bike. I know, for instance, at the velodrome, when they do the school outreach, the kids come in their shorts and their jogging pants and they ride the track for the first time. But the ones who love it, they do come to get certified, to move through the programming. But then that's where we have kit donations, and the NCIM has this like buckets of kit that riders either don't fit anymore or they're not on that team anymore, and we give them this kit. Like Ryan Roth gave us kit, and it's hilarious seeing kids in this kit and you're like, you don't even know whose kit you're wearing right now, but like actually he's on this call right now. And you don't even know whose kit you're wearing right now, but you're wearing like a pro racer kit right now. And it's neat though, because simply even having that kit and providing the comfort of having a chamois can encourage somebody to come back to the track. Actually, Emilee got some kit that did come from Carrie, and now she's partnered up with Carrie.
Yep.
And
shoes too.
And shoes. See, and having that opportunity, like if you weren't given those shoes or that kit, you may have experienced discomfort or you wouldn't have felt as welcome. And just having that opportunity to come back with that little bit just provided to you, well, hopefully hooked you for cycling for a long time. Very good. Kathleen, do you have anything to suggest?
Yes. Going back to Pauline's point about how do we get people from grassroots people into this, and what's the barrier? I think for the most part, it's infrastructure. And if I look on my street right now, just a couple of blocks down, they've put in huge pylons in the middle of the street that says, local traffic only. So the street is basically filled with cyclists and runners now, and the cars kind of have to winkle their way through. But because there are hardly any cars on the street now, it's full of cyclists. There are tons of women riding their bikes. So I think in Canada, infrastructure is a major barrier to getting people on bikes initially, because, everybody says they don't want to ride on the road. They don't want to ride on this street because they're going to get hit by a car. But I think, if we build the infrastructure, then people, like, there's so many people buying bikes now, and they're going to want to keep riding those bikes. So if the infrastructure follows, then I think that's how we sort of get the grassroots in. Sorry, the cat's doing stuff. And then from the other end, how do we get people involved in racing? And I think, thinking back to cyclocross, for me, it's sort of the perfect entry point, just because of, because it's in a safe space, it's in a park, and you're not going to get lost. And, the race is only 40 or 50 minutes long. So no matter how you're doing, that's how long your race is. And it's also, I think, more amenable to any sort of bike. So, if organizers could be supported in having, beginner category where you ride whatever kind of bike you have. If you have your commuter, that's fine. If you have your whatever, you have your road bike, it's fine. Whatever kind of bike you have, you can ride it. I think that would be a way to get people in. And then also sort of leveraging manufacturers to have, a demo day at a particular, you see Cannondale show up to, at Hardwood for demo days, and you see Cannondale show up at clubs. So couldn't we get manufacturers to show up at a race to provide bikes to the beginner category? I don't know, that might be a bit risky for manufacturers, but I think that would be a way to get more people involved in the racing aspect of things.
There was actually a yearly race, and now my partner Andrew was one of the ones that would head it up with the OCA, and there was a yearly race in like Malvern, Scarborough area, where I don't want to say all the bikes were brought to this race. It was like new kids only. Some of the like racer kids would come and help and like race with them, and I want to say every kid was provided a bike. Like I wish I had somebody who could verify this for me, but I really want to say that. And that's a form of public outreach. And they partnered actually with Toronto Police Services. So it was through the funding of the police services, and I'm sure maybe Canadian Tire Kickstart, I'm not sure, but these products were provided, and it got an entire community on bikes, and it was a yearly occurrence. And so that's great, Kathleen. Very good. Anything to add there? Are you good?
I'm good, thanks.
Okay, perfect. Chrissy, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so my thought was kind of like what you were thinking. I was thinking when I was running and all the other sports I was doing, like I had never even thought about being able to cycle. Like it wasn't even my universe at all, like that I could race. So I don't know why high schools, like it's not an offered sport to begin with. I don't know, people that have more experience could answer that. Because if there was, I definitely would have gone and tried cycling then. Also, if we can't have them in the schools as like a team sport, like when I was in junior school, we one day had a cycling day where I'm not sure who organized it, but it might have been a club that came. It was a whole day of cycling in our yard, taught us all the skills. Some people, I think everybody brought their bikes, but I don't know why some couldn't be provided and just go from school to school just to get the interest there when the kids are young, because I know a lot of kids, they get put into sports by their parents, and that's kind of what they end up doing, not really knowing that cycling is out there. So if they were exposed to it at a really young age in like grade school, maybe they might take that path.
Excellent thought. I just wanted to read a comment that is in our question section. I've also been posting in the chat. People can only really message the panelists, and what I do is I take your comments and I'm kind of putting it out there for everybody to read. And they are staying anonymous. But somebody in our question section here, so I have trouble copying and pasting it here, just says, I think we make a mistake to say diverse people to say diverse people of color are not in cycling because of finances. The cost of cycling sport is a barrier for many people or all backgrounds. There are a lot of financially able people of color doing other sports like running, golf. These are not cheap. I think we need to acknowledge that there are also spaces such as cycling and swimming, which I agree with, that have been set up, like the panelists say, that are historically rooted in an exclusively white culture. In fact, historically, people of color were not allowed in certain clubs, and we're going way back. And that is really the root cause. If we acknowledge that, then we should not be silent and should keep finding ways to make everybody know that this sport is inclusive. So I just thought that that was something I should mention. That was in our question section. I thought that was really good. Thanks, Chrissy. Let's move on to Rosa.
I think, so my point kind of goes a bit with Julia. If you just get a whole bunch of kids on bikes, there's lots of kids, like everyone right now, they're all riding bikes of all different diversities. I think that there needs to be more education that cycling is a sport as a child, to all different ethnic groups. And a lot of kids come to cycling through their parents. Like it's just something that their parents enjoy and they pass it on. So it always seems to be the same type of people cycling. And sorry, I lost my train of thought. So it also, representation matters in this way, because when people come into cycling, they want to see somebody that looks like them. Like if I come into cycling, when I started cycling, I didn't see many people of color. And so maybe I thought that this isn't the sport for me. There's no one successful really on the world stage or even locally. So when I came in and I really wasn't good, I said, maybe this is not my sport. So I think that if you can show, if different like provincial or national organizations can show different ethnicities, different diverse ethnicities that are successful, I think that more kids and more parents will see this and kind of relate to it. Yeah, it was very different than my soccer career. Like when I was playing soccer, I was never the only Black girl playing. And I think that like on the world stage, you have the Soccer World Cup and all different nations play. But when you look at, let's say, like a cycling World Cup, you don't see it. So yeah, it's just, you have to like put out the various, the different ethnicities. You just got to showcase
Influencers and role models and somebody to relate to. Yeah.
Yeah, you definitely need
Rosa signed up. We're going to get her on some posters.
No, not me.
Perfect. Good. I love that point, Rosa. Thank you so much. Emilee.
I actually really like that point that Rosa just brought up, the having the different influencers and kind of faces out there of all the different people who are involved in it. But then also I think a huge physical barrier is, like we were saying, like just access to bikes and kind of equipment, especially the special bikes that you can't just go out and buy at Canadian Tire, like a hand bike or a tandem. And again, having access to those and almost like normalizing it, like having it available, like in places that you can like get it anywhere. I know like the Tandem Eyes group that I was with for a little bit just happened to be in a local area near to me, but I don't know any other programs kind of out there like that in Ontario. So it just happened to be near me and accessible, but I know that it's not like out there. So kind of if like normalizing that and making it kind of, again, accessible and having access to it, kind of bringing up that point again, is huge.
Yeah, you're right. You're very fortunate being in Peterborough because Tandem Eyes is one of the only programs.
It's the only one.
That like CNIB does something in Toronto, but even that, it's hard to get information on, and it's hard really to get into that. And God forbid you're a hand cyclist trying to get into hand cycling, because like I get phone calls like, I want to be a hand cyclist. Cool. First, you got to buy a $5,000 bike and see if you like the sport. Like it's a difficult.
It's an extra step in the process on top of those financial barriers, those like access barriers. Just it's an extra thing on top of like
Like, sorry, you don't even know if you like the sport yet. Well, first you got to buy a piece of equipment,
Yeah.
and that's not how it should be. Whether it's, you know, physical minority, racial minority, I think everybody should have access to being able to at least try the sport, and
At least try it. Like, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, we are running out of time. We have already gone quite late, but I will say this has been a fantastic conversation. What I'd love to end off with is just a little bit of a comment from each of you. And again, if it's been said, you can say, I'm good, that wraps it up. But I would love to know, and we've been talking about next steps, but realistically, what are some next steps that we can take? Do you have suggestions for clubs, teams, or organizations like the Ontario Cycling Association to help create a more diverse membership, be it increasing generally female membership or reaching out to various minorities to just make it a bit more of a diverse group of athletes? We'll start with Pauline. We'll go through and then we'll say our goodbyes.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I guess the discussion I was having with a friend of mine, and I even think of BOW, the cycling club that we do. We hold fundraisers and we give to different community groups in the city, but you know, maybe our next one is seeing if we can purchase some bikes and donating them and doing it that way. And then with my race team, we've thought about, you know, it could be doing a flat workshop, or just how do we get more outreach into people in places that might not always know about cycling. And I mean, generally people are riding downtown, and being right in the core of Toronto, you see a lot of bikes, but it's like we need to make an effort to go to the other communities and ride in other parts where bikes maybe aren't so seen, and maybe not even showing up all kitted out, but just going in our regular clothes. And just, I guess my personal aspect, or my personal perspective, is just how do we get more people on bikes and make it feel safe and fun, and then kind of the racing and the other stuff will come later. But I think if we just really expand people on bikes through outreach, education, and looking at what the barriers are and trying to get through those.
Perfect. Thank you, Pauline. Julia, she's got lots of ideas. What else have you got?
You know what? If you're female and visible minority, and you have, let's say you have disability, keep on doing what you're doing because you're already leading. If you have privilege and you already have a club and there are, you know, the majority is male, then be proactive and take your resources and shift them, because when you have that other balance come into place, it will augment your club. And I don't know if a lot of people believe that part. So it's the conversation now is not just between us and females, it is the whole community. So if you know somebody, let's say a male or somebody that can support and start new opportunities, get them to do that. That's my push. It's like on the project side, it's like, do we have projects for female cyclists? I don't say don't have projects for males. I'm like, do we have projects for females, right? Do we have an environment where females can thrive, and create an environment where they will thrive and the males will also thrive? So it's pretty general, but that's like these people here that are with me on this panel, I'm like, you're already doing tons when people see you doing your thing. So
that's why when we were thinking about who to include on this panel, it's people that are either directly affected, directly involved, helping make a difference, and let everybody on this panel keep doing what you're doing. Exactly what Julia says. Excellent. Kathleen.
I think I've said a couple of times all that I have to contribute, so I'm going to pass.
Okay, moving on to Chrissy.
Just coming from a para perspective, for outreach, I'm thinking maybe athletes can go to like Variety Village or the Ability Center and just try to recruit younger younger females and males to get involved in like hand cycling and para in general, because I know they get drawn to basketball and a lot of the other flashier sports. So they might not even know that hand cycling is out there. So that's just one idea.
Spreading the word, spreading the news. Exactly. Good. Rosa.
So 2 big points. I think outreach and education, especially for young kids, all the kids riding bikes outside right now, and representation. So, because when they come to cycling, they're going to want to see someone who looks like them being successful.
I love that. The other interesting thing that has been mentioned throughout this conversation is we are in unfortunate times right now with COVID, but what's really interesting is bike shops are selling out of bikes. You can't find exercise equipment online anymore because everybody is taking this opportunity, although it may be unfortunate that they do have more time on their hands. There are so many new people entering our sport right now. And I know there is one celebrity cyclist that kind of has a little bit of a YouTube video that he posted on social media. And he basically told cycling as a society, like, hey guys, let's not F this up. We got a whole new generation of cyclists coming into the sport. Who cares if their clothes doesn't fit properly? Who cares if they maybe don't know how to ride a line yet? Let's keep encouraging them and just keep them in the sport, because we want more people. We want to grow cycling as a sport for women, for men, for everybody. So very good. Thanks. Perfect. Emilee, final remarks.
I think the outreach is huge, but also something like we were talking about where like people can like drop-ins where people can just come and try it without having to like commit and like buying that equipment and like, oh, I've never ridden a bike before. Let me just go like buy a bike and then not like it or something, or who can't afford it, like that opportunity to try it and get involved before committing kind of thing.
And it's a good point to say that not just necessarily borrowing a neighbor's bike, because they may not have a clue what to do with it, how to do it, and it can be dangerous, especially if you fall. So the programs that can be offered, again, Julia, in the schools, or Try the Track programs, school outreach, the schools programs where they bring a coach into the school and they get a whole classroom of people riding bikes. They're not just encouraging cycling, but they're teaching the basics as well, which is safety and making that first experience or potential first experience to be an enjoyable one and not
we use the phrase so much. It's like riding a bike.
Yeah.
Well, how many people are there out there who don't know how to ride one?
Yep. Yeah. Or maybe don't have the opportunity to,
or
too scared to try. Yeah. Perfect. All right. Well, I just want to say a big, huge thank you to all of our panelists that we have today. They took the time out of their evening, their jobs, their families to join us here on this panel that has almost been 2 hours long, but I think we've had a definite, very good conversation. We've had some questions. I've tried my best to address and answer them all. If you have any other questions and perhaps you want to personally address one of the panelists, ask a question or opinion, just feel free to email me at the email that I contacted everybody with the Zoom link. And once again, that's events, events.team@ontariocycling.org. Also, you'll be happy to know that this conversation has been recorded and we are going to be posting it up on our Ontario Cycling Association YouTube channel. So you can have a listen if you missed any part of it. But once again, thank you to all of our panelists. I want to thank Pauline, Julia, Kathleen, Chrissy, Rosa, and Emilee just for taking the time to talk to us. I can see some people saying thank you here in the comments as well, but I'm going to sign off for tonight. Once again, thank you. And everybody, stay on your bikes, keep riding, and have a good time.